The night my second husband tossed my suitcase onto the front lawn like it was a bag of trash, I was 73 years old barefoot, and holding a Pyrex dish of banana pudding I'd just made for his poker buddies. And y'all, I wish I was exaggerating. I stood there on that cracked driveway in Macon, wind whipping my gray hair around my face, watching 41 years of marriage slam shut behind a locked front door. Clint had the nerve to crack the window and say, "Loretta, ain't nobody looking for a woman your age. You should have thought about that before you got so dull." Dull. I'd raised his sons, paid off his contracting debt when the housing market tanked in the 90s, cooked 3 meals a day through his gout, his bad back, his midlife crises, plural. Dull. He laughed when he said it. Actually laughed. Like I was the punchline. That laugh? It echoed a lot longer than the door slam. Now let me back up before you think I was some helpless old lady with no backbone. I wasn't born yesterday. I'd already buried one husband before Clint ever strutted into my life. My first husband was Thomas Avery. Though back when I loved him, he was just Tommy. We were married in 1972 in a little church outside Savannah. Young, broke, wild about each other. 2 years later, I was told he died in a boating accident off the Oregon coast. Closed casket. Storm wreckage. No body recovered. I was 24 and pregnant with grief. I mourned him the way Southern women do. Quiet, steady, casseroles in hand, tears in private. I kept his last birthday card in a tin box, and told myself God had a plan. 7 years later, Clint came along at a church barbecue. Confident. Hendy. Promised stability. Said all the right things. Turns out he was good at promising. The divorce happened fast. Too fast. House in his name. Truck in his name. Retirement accounts misplaced long before I ever thought to check. That by the time the papers were finalized, I had $412, a suitcase, and my pride, which was limping but still breathing. I moved into a weekly rate motel called the Peach Lantern Inn. You know the type. Faded sign. Ice machine that sounds like it's dying. Carpet older than disco. Room 12 smelled like mildew and somebody else's cigarettes. The heater knocked like it had a grudge. First night there, I sat on the edge of that bed and stared at the wall and thought, so this is how it ends. 73. Homeless. Disposable. And Clint? Word got back to me through my daughter that he'd moved a 52-year-old, interior designer, named Brandy into my kitchen before the ink on the divorce decree dried. He told somebody at the VFW hall, "Loretta's on her own now. Nobody wants a woman that old." That sentence could have crushed me. Instead, it did something else. It froze something inside me. 3 weeks later, on a drizzly Thursday morning, I was sitting in the motel lobby pretending to read a People magazine from 2018 when the front door opened. In walked a man in a navy suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe. He scanned the room like he was looking for a fugitive. "Is there a Mrs. Loretta Hayes here?" he asked the clerk. I nearly didn't raise my hand. He walked over, extended his hand. "Ma'am, my name is Daniel Mercer. I'm an estate attorney out of Portland." Estate attorney? I almost laughed. "Your first husband," he said carefully, lowering his voice, "Thomas Avery, passed away last month." I blinked at him. "My first husband died in 1974, I said. He didn't blink. "No, ma'am. He relocated in 1974. He passed away January 9th of this year." The magazine slid out of my lap. The lobby got very quiet. "He left an estate valued at approximately $47 million, Daniel said. 47 million. I thought maybe I was having a stroke. That's what it felt like my brain short-circuited. "And you," he added gently, "are listed as the sole primary beneficiary." I stared at him so long he shifted in his seat. "There is one condition," he said. Of course there was. There's always a catch. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in room 12 staring at a water stain shaped like Florida, and replayed everything I thought I knew about my life. Tommy hadn't drowned. He hadn't died. He had left. For 50 years he'd been alive somewhere, building a fortune while I grieved him, remarried, grew old, got discarded. Why? That question burned hotter than the money. What kind of man lets the woman he married believe he's dead? And what kind of fool am I for never suspecting? By sunrise, I stopped asking why. I started asking what. What's the condition? What's the trap? What's this going to cost me? Daniel Mercer said he'd return at 10 a.m. At 9:58, I was dressed, hairbrushed, tin box from storage sitting on the motel dresser. Inside that tin box, my marriage certificate from 1972. 3 letters Tommy wrote me before we married. And a pressed yellow wildflower he once tucked behind my ear because he couldn't afford roses. Daniel arrived exactly at 10. He sat across from me in that sad little lobby chair and said, "In order to inherit, you must travel to Oregon within 60 days and formally confirm your identity as Thomas Avery's lawful spouse at the time of his disappearance. There may be contesting parties." Contest? I repeated. He hesitated. Thomas had a daughter. I felt the air leave my lungs. A daughter? I whispered. Yes, ma'am. She is 51. She has already been notified of the estate. Already been notified. Which meant she'd known about me for weeks. Planning. Preparing. Maybe plotting. Daniel folded his hands. "Mrs. Hayes, will you accept the condition? $400. A motel room. A man who laughed when he threw me away. Or a past that wasn't dead." I looked at that pressed wildflower in my palm. Then I looked at him. "Book the flight," I said. And that was the moment everything changed. Because I had no idea that the daughter waiting in Oregon wasn't grieving. She was hunting. And I was walking straight into her trap. If you think that flight to Oregon was the hard part, honey, that was just the invitation. I have never liked airplanes. Not when I was young. Not now. Not ever. But let me tell you something. When you're 73, freshly divorced, sleeping in a motel that smells like old regret, and somebody tells you there's $47 million waiting in Portland, you suddenly get real brave about turbulence. I boarded that plane in Atlanta with one carry-on bag, my tin box of memories, and nerves jangling like cheap Christmas lights. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at Georgia shrinking beneath the clouds and thought, "Clint, you better hope this is real. Because if it is, you miscalculated me." Portland was gray when I landed. Not gloomy, just serious. Like a city that minds its business. Daniel Mercer was waiting at baggage claim. Calm. Polite. The kind of man who folds hotel receipts in straight lines. He didn't waste time. "Mrs. Hayes, before we proceed to the hotel, I need to clarify something important." That tone. The lawyer tone. "There has been communication from Thomas's daughter," he said carefully. "She intends to challenge the will." "Of course she does. What's her name?" I asked. "Madeline Avery." Madeline. Pretty name. Dangerous, I'd soon learn. "She claims undue influence," Daniel continued. "Mental incompetence. Questions about Thomas's state of mind when the will was written." I stared at him. "He wrote it 8 years ago," Daniel said. "And amended it twice. Most recently 18 months before his death." "And he left her nothing?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Correct." That hit me sideways. Nothing? Not a dollar? What kind of father does that? What kind of story was I walking into? The hotel Daniel booked wasn't fancy, but it was clean. Big windows. Real mattresses. Towels that didn't smell like bleach and despair. I stood in that quiet room for a long minute and just breathed. It had been months since I'd felt safe inside four walls. I took a long bath that night. Let the water soak into my bones. Tried to steady my thoughts. Tommy alive for 50 years. A daughter I never knew existed. A fortune with my name on it. And a legal battle brewing before I'd even unpacked. At 9:12 the next morning my phone rang. Unknown number. Oregon area code. I answered. "Is this Loretta Hayes?" The voice was cool. Controlled. Younger than I expected. "Yes. This is Madeline Avery." There it was. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Silence stretched between us like a rope pulled too tight. "You've caused quite a disruption," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me. My father died 6 weeks ago. I handled the funeral. The estate. The property. I sat with him during chemo. And then suddenly, you appear." I swallowed. I didn't know he was alive. She let out a short laugh. Not amused. That's convenient. There it is again. That word. Convenient. I buried him 50 years ago, I said quietly. Don't you dare call that convenient. She went silent for a second. Then she said, we need to meet. We chose a coffee shop in the Pearl District. Neutral ground. I arrived early. When Madeline walked in, I knew instantly she was his. Same eyes. Same jawline. Same way of scanning a room like it owed her something. She wasn't soft. She was sharp. Early 50s. Impeccably dressed. Expensive boots. The kind of woman who'd never had to check the price tag. She didn't smile. You look older than I imagined, she said after sitting down. Well, I replied evenly. Time tends to do that. She studied me like I was a stain on white fabric. My father described his first marriage as suffocating. That landed like a slap. I didn't flinch. I have a marriage certificate from 1972, I said calmly. Do you have something from 1972? Her jaw tightened. He left because he couldn't breathe, she pressed. Because you were controlling. Cold. I leaned back in my chair. Sweetheart, I said gently. Your father left because he was scared. Her eyes flashed. You don't know that. No, I admitted. But neither do you. She leaned forward. He was sick at the end. Confused. He wasn't thinking clearly when he wrote that will. There's medical documentation that says otherwise, I replied. Her composure cracked, just a hair. So she didn't know that part yet. Then she laid her cards down. I'm prepared to offer you $15 million, she said smoothly. You withdraw. Let the estate default. I'll handle the rest. 15 million. My brain tried to do the math and short-circuited. That's generous, I said slowly. It's practical, she corrected. Litigation is expensive, stressful, ugly, and you're not young. There it was again. Age. Like it was a weapon. You think I'm tired? I asked softly. She didn't answer. I stood up. I'll see you in court, I said. Her eyes went cold. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I held her gaze. Oh honey, I said quietly. You have no idea what I've already survived. And I walked out. That night, I came back to my hotel room and knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. The lamp on the side table was angled slightly differently. My suitcase zipper wasn't where I left it. The air felt disturbed. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I pulled out my phone and took photos before touching anything. Then I went downstairs and asked for the keycard log. Someone had entered my room for 43 minutes that afternoon. No housekeeping scheduled. Just entry. Professional. Quiet. Planned. I called Daniel. Then I called the police. Madeline was not grieving. She was digging. And I had just become the obstacle between her and $47 million. The next morning, Daniel moved me to a different hotel under a corporate account. No public name. No easy trace. He also introduced me to a litigation attorney, Paul Donnelly. Tall. The kind of man who speaks softly because he doesn't need to raise his voice. When I told him about the hotel intrusion, he didn't blink. Document everything, he said. We'll make it part of the record. That's when I realized something. Madeline thought she was hunting prey. But she'd misread me. I wasn't prey. I was a woman who had buried one husband, survived another, lost everything, and was still standing. And I was done being quiet. 3 days later, Madeline escalated. A man showed up at my daughter's house back in Georgia. Asked questions about my mental stability. My drinking habits. My history of manipulation. Left a business card from a private investigations firm. I sat in that Portland hotel room holding the phone after my daughter told me, and something icy slid into place inside my chest. Enough. Paul drafted a cease and desist letter before sunset. Filed formal notice of witness intimidation. Added the hotel intrusion to the complaint. Paper trails. Official stamps. No more subtlety. That evening, Madeline called me again. You're making this difficult, she said. No. Irreplicably. You are. You think you're going to win? She snapped. I think your father made a decision, I said. And I intend to honor it. Silence. Then she said something that chilled me. He told me why he left you. I felt my pulse in my throat. And I asked. He said you destroyed him. And then she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. Destroyed him. Is that what he told her? Is that what he believed? Or was that just the story she needed to justify what she was about to do next? Because deep down I knew something. If Madeline was willing to break into my hotel room and send investigators after my daughter, she wasn't done. Not even close. When somebody tells you that you destroyed a man you buried 50 years ago, it does something strange to your bones. It doesn't break them. It rattles them. That night in Portland, I didn't sleep. I sat by the hotel window watching rain slide down the glass and asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask in decades. What if I didn't know the whole truth about 1974? Because here's the thing. Grief has a way of freezing memories in amber. You remember the good parts. The way he laughed. The way he held your hand in church. The way he said your name. You don't question the ending. You survive it. But now? The ending was back on the table. The next morning, Paul Donnelly called. We received something, he said. His tone was neutral, but there was weight under it. From Madeline's side? Yes. A document. They intend to submit it at the hearing. I closed my eyes. What kind of document? A handwritten letter allegedly from Thomas. Dated 4 years ago. Allegedly. What does it say? Paul hesitated. It expresses doubt about the will. Suggests he felt pressured. Mention regret. Pressured. Regret. I let out a slow breath. Do you believe it? I asked. I believe, Paul said carefully, that we'll have it examined. That was lawyer speak for. I don't trust this thing as far as I can throw it. Still, my stomach twisted. Because if Tommy had written something like that, if he'd regretted leaving everything to me, if he'd changed his mind and someone hid it, that could shift everything. And the next move she made was going to be nuclear. Later that afternoon, Daniel brought me something else. A journal. Leather-bound. Worn. Edges softened by time. Found among Thomas's personal effects, he said. It spans about 25 years. Not daily entries, sporadic. But your name appears. My hands trembled when I opened it. There's something intimate about reading a dead man's private thoughts. Especially a man you once loved. The handwriting was his. No doubt about it. Slight right slant. Heavy loops on the L. I'd recognize it blind. I turned pages slowly. Business notes. Weather comments. Reflections about aging. And then, March 12th. Dreamt about Loretta again. Woke up with the old ache. I stopped breathing. Kept reading. July 4th. Fireworks tonight. Thought about Savannah. About the way she used to cover her ears and laugh at herself. My throat closed. He remembered that. He remembered. Page after page, scattered over years, were small mentions of me. Not dramatic. Not obsessive. But present. Leaving was the worst decision I ever made. I shut the journal and pressed it to my chest. Destroyed him? No. He destroyed himself. 3 days later, Paul called an emergency meeting. The forensic handwriting expert had finished examining Madeline's letter. We sat in his office. Quiet, controlled, professional. Paul slid the report across the table. It's a forgery, he said. Flat. Certain. Ink dating placed it within the last year. Tommy had been dead 14 months. The handwriting matched inconsistently across keystrokes. Someone had tried. But they hadn't known his rhythm. They hadn't known the tiny hook he put on the end of his Y. Madeline had gambled big. And she'd just set herself on fire. The hearing at the Multnomah County Courthouse was scheduled for late March. I'd never been inside that building before. Tall ceilings. Polished wood. The kind of place where truth feels heavy. Madeline sat across from me at the petitioner's table. No esmail. No small talk. Her attorney looked tense. The forged letter sat in evidence. Waiting. When the forensic report was entered into the record, the courtroom shifted. You could feel it. Madeline's jaw tightened. Her attorney whispered something urgent in her ear. The judge's expression didn't change, but his tone did. Counsel, he said evenly. Are you aware that submitting fraudulent documentation to this court constitutes a criminal offense? Silence. Madeline didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead. That was the first crack. Then Paul stood for cross-examination. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't attack. He simply laid out facts. Private investigators hired before I was located. Hotel room intrusion documented. Contact made with my daughter during active litigation. And now, a forged letter. Each piece clicked into place like dominoes falling in slow motion. Madeline tried to hold composure. Until she didn't. She turned in her chair and looked at me directly. She ruined him, she said suddenly. She made him run. The judge's pen stopped mid-sentence. That is not responsive to the question, he said. But she kept going. She suffocated him. He told me. He said she controlled everything. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react. Because here's what I knew in that moment. Grief can twist into something ugly. But this wasn't grief. This was entitlement cracking under pressure. The judge ordered her to confine her answers. Her attorney's face had gone pale. And in that second I realized something else. Madeline wasn't just afraid of losing money. She was afraid of losing the story she'd built about her father. If he chose me, if he wrote me into that will with a clear mind, then what did that say about her? The hearing adjourned for forensic confirmation and reconvened 3 weeks later. Madeline showed up without her original attorney. He'd withdrawn. No explicación. Just gone. 3 other firms had declined representation, Paul told me. Forgery has a smell in legal circles. Nobody wants to breathe it. When the judge delivered his ruling, it was precise and final. The will stands. The estate passes to Loretta Hayes. $47 million. Just like that. After months of fear. After motel rooms and humiliation and Clint's laughter ringing in my ears. It was done. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Outside the courthouse, Madeline stood alone on the steps. No attorney. No boyfriend. No entourage. Just her. For a split second, our eyes met. There was no hatred there anymore. Just something hollow. She opened her mouth like she might say something. But then she closed it, turned, and walked away. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. Because 2 weeks later, I received a call from Paul. The district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation into fraud upon the court. Madeline wasn't just facing a lost inheritance. She was facing felony charges. And then, the final twist. Daniel called me that evening. There's one more item in Thomas's estate, he said quietly. A sealed letter. Marked. For Loretta. When everything is settled. I held the phone tighter. Bring it, I whispered. He delivered it the next morning. 4 handwritten pages. His handwriting. Real this time. Apology. Explanation. Fear in 1974. Debt. Dangerous people. Panic. He'd believed disappearing would protect me. He never imagined the lie would snowball into a death certificate assumption. And once it did, he didn't know how to come back. Cowardice. He called it that himself. The last line read, "You deserved a braver man." I sat there a long time with that sentence. Because here's the truth. He was right. I did. But I didn't get one. So I became one. I thought the hardest battles were behind me. I thought Clint's laughter was the worst betrayal I'd face. I thought Madeline's schemes were the final test. I was wrong. Because the moment news of the inheritance reached Georgia, Clint called. And what he said next. You know what's funny? Silence. Real silence. The kind that hangs in the air when someone who once mocked you suddenly realizes you're not the punchline anymore. That was the silence on the other end of the phone when I answered Clint's call. I almost didn't. Georgia number. Late evening. But something in my gut said, pick it up. Loretta, he said. Same voice. Same drawl. But it sounded smaller. Yes, I replied evenly. He cleared his throat. I've been hearing things. I didn't rescue him from the pause. I hear you got yourself into some money. Got myself into. Like I tripped over $47 million walking to the mailbox. I inherited something, I said. Another pause. Well, he chuckled nervously. Ain't that something? Guess life's full of surprises. That laugh wasn't confident anymore. It was fishing. Let me remind you what this man said when he threw me out. Nobody wants a woman that old. That's what he said. Now here he was, calling a woman that old. I've been thinking, Clint continued. Maybe we moved too fast with that divorce. Oh, I almost smiled. We. I asked sweetly. He ignored that. 41 years is a long time, Loretta. We built something. That counts for something. Built something. He meant the house. The one he kept. The one Brandy redecorated with white furniture I wasn't allowed to sit on. You built it in your name, I reminded him calmly. He didn't like that. That was just paperwork, he snapped. Don't start that. Ah. There he was. The real Clint. Paperwork only matters when it benefits him. I heard you're still out in Oregon, he said. I am. Well, maybe you ought to come home. Home? The place he locked me out of barefoot. You think I left something there? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Look, Rhonda and I. That didn't work out. Oh. Funny how that goes, I murmured. She wasn't what I thought, he muttered. That almost made me laugh out loud. You don't say. Then he did it. He shifted gears. Listen, Loretta. Legally speaking, you and me were married when you inherited that money. There it was. The hook. I was divorced when Thomas passed, I said evenly. But you were married when he died, Clint argued. There's community property laws. In Georgia. I interrupted gently. Not for inheritances, Clint. Silence. You could practically hear him scrambling. I sacrificed a lot for you, he said finally. No. You did not. You sacrificed? I asked softly. Don't twist this, he snapped. I carried that household. I thought about the nights I worked double shifts at the school library when his construction bids fell through. The loans I co-signed. The meals. The quiet shrinking. Clint, I said calmly. You carried your ego. I carried everything else. He inhaled sharply. You owe me something, he said. There it is. Entitlement. Same scent. Different state. I owe you nothing, I replied. And I meant it. He changed tactics again. You're 73, he said bluntly. That's a lot of money for one person. You gonna manage all that alone? Yes. Yes, I said. People take advantage of you, he pressed. They already tried, I replied. It didn't go well for them. He didn't know about Madeline's criminal investigation yet. But he would. Small towns talk. Loretta, he said, lowering his voice, we can fix this. We can remarry. Start fresh. Remarry. Start fresh. After he told me nobody wanted me. After he laughed. You want back in because of the money, I said plainly. That ain't fair. It's accurate. Silence again. Then something ugly crept into his tone. You think you're better than me now? No. I just think I'm finally free. I think, I said carefully, you misjudged me. Help me, he said slowly. I might have to look into my legal options. Legal options. That word choice told me everything. Threat. Pressure. Same old Clint. Go ahead, I said calmly. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when he lost control. You ungrateful, he started. I hung up, blocked the number, and set the phone down without shaking. Because here's what changed. 6 months ago, that conversation would have shattered me. Now, it barely dented the surface. The next morning, I met Carol at our usual cafe. She was stirring her coffee when I sat down. Let me guess, she said. The ex called. How'd you know? She smiled. Money has a way of resurrecting the recently disinterested. I laughed. God, I loved that woman. What did he want? She asked. To remarry, I said. She didn't even blink. I repeated. She sipped her coffee. He doesn't want you. He wants access. Blunt. True. Do you regret telling him? She asked. No. Good. She folded her crossword and leaned forward slightly. You need to prepare, she said quietly. For what? For the possibility that he doesn't accept no. That thought followed me home. Because Clint wasn't sophisticated like Madeline. He wasn't strategic. He was reactive. And reactive men with bruised egos can be unpredictable. 3 days later, Paul called. "Your ex-husband has contacted an attorney," he said. "Of course he has. On what grounds?" "He's exploring whether he has a claim to marital assets acquired during your marriage." I let out a long breath. "He doesn't." "I agree," Paul said calmly. "But he may attempt nuisance litigation." Translation: he might sue just to be annoying. Fine. Let him. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came that same afternoon. A woman showed up at my apartment building asking for me. Tall. Blonde. Late 40s. I recognized her instantly from social media. Brandy. The interior designer. The white furniture replacement. She introduced herself politely to the front desk and asked if I was home. I watched her from the lobby camera feed on my phone. Didn't answer. Didn't engage. But I felt something shift. Clint wasn't done. And apparently neither was Brandy. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Woman to woman. No name. No signature. But I knew. Brandy. I stared at the screen. Because if she thought she was coming to warn me, or threaten me, or negotiate something on Clint's behalf, she was about to learn something important. I am not the woman who stood barefoot in that driveway anymore. I am not the woman who shrank to keep peace. And if Clint thought he could circle back into my life through legal loopholes or emotional manipulation, he had underestimated me again. But what I didn't know yet was that Clint's attorney wasn't just exploring nuisance litigation. He was digging into something from 1974. Something about Thomas's disappearance. Something buried. Something that, if twisted the right way, could threaten everything. And when I found out what it was, even I had to sit down. That there's a particular kind of fear that only shows up when the past gets dragged back into the light. Not embarrassment. Not guilt. Fear. The kind that makes your stomach drop like you missed a stair. That's what I felt when Paul called and said, "Clint's attorney is requesting records related to Thomas's presumed death in 1974. I was standing in my kitchen in Portland, holding a mug of coffee I suddenly couldn't swallow. "On what grounds?" I asked. "He's exploring whether you knowingly benefited from a fraudulent death claim," Paul said evenly. I went still. Fraudulent death claim. "They're suggesting," he continued carefully, "that you may have suspected Thomas was alive and failed to report it." I laughed. It came out sharp. "That's insane." "I agree," Paul said. "But insanity doesn't prevent someone from filing paperwork. Let me tell you something plain. When they told me Tommy died in 1974, I believed it with my whole heart. There was wreckage found off the Oregon coast. His truck abandoned. A Coast Guard report. Storm conditions. I was 24 and pregnant with grief. You don't question official seals at 24. You collapse. You collected a small insurance payout," Paul added. $5,000. Enough to pay off the car loan and funeral expenses that never happened. "You signed a statement affirming belief in his death," Paul said. "Yes," I replied. "Because I believed it." "Clint's attorney is implying you might have known more." I felt something cold and furious rise in my chest. "I buried a memory," I said slowly. "I didn't bury a secret. Here's what Clint was trying to do. If he could create even a whisper of fraud connected to that old insurance payout, he could argue that my inheritance was tainted. If tainted, it could freeze assets. If frozen, it could pressure settlement. It was a long shot. But Clint was desperate. And desperate men throw mud hoping something sticks. That evening, I opened the tin box again. Marriage certificate. Letters. Wildflower. I dug deeper. And there it was. The Coast Guard report copy. Official letterhead. Presumed lost at sea. No body recovered. Case closed due to severe storm conditions. Nothing about it suggested a staged disappearance. Nothing pointed at me. But I felt uneasy anyway. Because memory is tricky. And Clint's accusation had poked something I hadn't examined in decades. There had been one thing. One tiny, almost forgotten thing. 3 weeks before the accident, Tommy had come home late. Agitated. Said he'd made a mistake in an investment. Wouldn't elaborate. I'd asked questions. He'd shut down. We'd argued. Hard. It was the only real fight we ever had. He'd said, "You don't understand pressure like this." I'd snapped back, "Then help me understand." He didn't. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Was that suspicious? Maybe. But suspicious doesn't equal foreknowledge. It equals youth. And poor communication. 2 days later, Clint's attorney formally filed a motion requesting a review of the 1974 death documentation. Paul met me at his office with a folder already prepared. "Here's what we'll do," he said calmly. "We'll produce the Coast Guard report, the insurance file, your signed affidavit from 1974. We cooperate fully." And then his argument collapses. He paused. Unless what? Unless he produces evidence suggesting you were in contact with Thomas after the disappearance. I stared at him. "I wasn't." "I believe you," Paul said. "But we need to prepare for the possibility he claims otherwise." That night, I received another text. A known number. "You should have stayed quiet in Georgia." No name. But I knew. Clint. He wasn't just fishing legally. He was angry. And angry men make mistakes. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Paul. Documentation. Always documentation. 3 days later, the twist landed. Paul called early. "Loretta," he said carefully, "Clint's attorney has submitted something." "What?" "A copy of a money order receipt dated October 1974. Purchased in Savannah. Made payable to a P.O. box in Oregon. The sender name listed as L. Hayes." My heart stopped. I sat down slowly. October 1974. 2 months after Tommy's presumed death. "I never sent money to Oregon," I whispered. "The receipt includes your maiden signature." Maiden signature. Loretta Caldwell. My mind raced. Had I? No. I would remember that. Wouldn't I? Unless someone used my name. Or forged it. Then it hit me. Tommy's younger cousin Earl. He had asked me once for my ID to pick up a package. I'd handed it over without thinking. Family. Trust. October 1974. Earl disappeared from Georgia 6 months later. Nobody thought much of it. He'd always been slippery. Could he have used my name to send something? To Tommy? Was Tommy already alive somewhere by then? Was Earl helping him? And if so, did that mean Tommy had contacted someone back home? Not me. But someone. I felt dizzy. Paul was quiet while I processed. "We'll subpoena the original document," he said finally. "Verify handwriting. Trace the P.O. box ownership. If it was Earl, we'll find out. But if it was me?" I whispered. He didn't soften his tone. "Then we deal with it." I appreciated that about him. No sugar coating. Just forward motion. That afternoon, Carol met me at the cafe and saw it in my face immediately. "What happened?" she asked. I told her. Every detail. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Did you send it?" she asked gently. "No." "Then breathe." "What if they twist it?" "They will," she said. "That's what desperate people do." I stared at my coffee. What if there's more I don't remember? She leaned in. "Loretta, memory under trauma doesn't create secret conspiracies. It creates blank spaces. Don't let someone else fill those blanks with their narrative." God, that steadied me. A week later, the forensic results came back. The money order signature did not match mine. It was similar. Close enough to pass at a glance. But wrong in stroke pressure. Wrong in spacing. Wrong in rhythm. Forged. The P.O. box? Registered to a shell business later linked to Earl Avery, Tommy's cousin. Clint's legal grenade fizzled in midair. But here's the part that shook me. The P.O. box was active for 3 years after Tommy's disappearance. 3 years. Which means he wasn't just hiding. He was communicating. Just not with me. And that hurt more than Clint's accusations ever could. Paul filed a motion to dismiss Clint's nuisance claim. The judge didn't take long. Dismissed with prejudice, meaning Clint couldn't bring it back. But legal defeat doesn't always stop emotional fallout. Because 2 nights later, there was a knock at my apartment door. Late. Unscheduled. I checked the camera. Clint. Standing there. In Oregon. On my doorstep. Unannounced. And the look on his face? Wasn't angry. Wasn't charming. Wasn't apologetic. It was desperate. And desperation? Is unpredictable. I didn't open the door. But he didn't leave. And what he shouted next through that hallway made my blood run cold. I watched Clint through the door camera for a full 30 seconds before he even realized I could see him. He looked older. Not just physically. Smaller somehow. Wrinkles deeper. Shoulders sagging. That confident swagger he used to carry like a badge? Gone. He knocked again. Harder. Loretta, he shouted. The hallway in my building echoed. I cracked the door open, chain-latched. What are you doing here? I asked, voice calm. He stepped closer like proximity alone could intimidate me. We need to talk. We did that. On the phone. This ain't the phone, he snapped. No, it wasn't. It was my territory. And that changed everything. He looked past me into the apartment. Took in the hardwood floors. The artwork. The quiet dignity of a life I chose. You're living real nice, he muttered. I am. He swallowed something that looked suspiciously like resentment. I drove 3 days, he said. You gonna make me stand in the hallway? Yes. That surprised him. He wasn't used to boundaries. Loretta, he said, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators. I know something about Thomas. My stomach tightened. You know nothing about Thomas. He leaned closer. I know why he really left. I didn't react. Didn't give him that satisfaction. Go on, I said evenly. He glanced up and down the hallway before speaking again. He didn't run from debt. I felt my pulse thud once hard. He ran from you. There it was. The blade again. Madeline had said something similar. Now Clint. 2 different people. Same narrative. Coincidence? Or planted story? Who told you that? I asked quietly. He hesitated just a beat too long. Doesn't matter. It does, I replied. He tried to push the door. The chain held. You don't want to open that can, he warned. I think you already did. He shifted tactics like he always did. Look, he said, running a hand over his face. I talked to somebody back home. Earl's sister. Earl. That name again. She said Thomas was planning to leave before the storm. Said y'all were fighting. Said he felt trapped. Of course we fought. We were 24 and scared. That's not a conspiracy. That doesn't mean I knew he was alive, I said calmly. Clint's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? That was the moment I understood. He wasn't chasing truth. He was chasing leverage. If he could create doubt about my innocence in 1974, he could rattle me. Maybe pressure a payout. Maybe scare me into settlement. Same playbook. Different villain. You drove 3 days for this? I asked. For us, he insisted. There is no us. His mask slipped then. You think you're better than me now? He demanded. No, I said softly. I think I'm finally done with you. That hit him harder than yelling ever could have. His jaw clenched. You ain't innocent in all this, he said. You got blood on your hands. My blood went cold. What are you implying? I'm saying, he lowered his voice to a hiss. Men don't fake their death for no reason. He turned and walked down the hallway before I could respond. Just like that. Left the accusation hanging in the air like smoke. I locked the door and leaned against it. Blood on your hands. I replayed 1974 in my mind again. The argument. His stress. The storm. The Coast Guard report. What Clint didn't know, what Madeline didn't know, was that Tommy's sealed letter had explained something critical. He had owed money to people who weren't patient. People who made threats. He believed disappearing would protect me. He believed staying would put me in danger. Cowardly? Yes. But violent? No. He never raised a hand to me. Never threatened. Never hinted at escape. He panicked. That's what he wrote. Still, Clint's words wormed into the quiet. What if someone else believed a darker version? What if Earl's involvement was deeper? The next morning, I called Paul. Clint came to my apartment, I said. There was a pause. He did what? I explained everything. The accusations. Earl's sister. The insinuations. Paul's voice hardened. I'm filing for a restraining order. That seems dramatic, I said. He crossed state lines and confronted you with veiled accusations, Paul replied. That's not dramatic. That's escalation. He was right. And here's what I finally accepted in that moment. Clint wasn't just bitter. He was unraveling. 2 days later, something happened that shifted the ground again. Daniel Mercer called. Loretta, he said carefully, we've received a request from the district attorney's office. For what? They want to interview you regarding Thomas's disappearance. The room went quiet. Why? I whispered. Because the reopened financial trails from the probate investigation revealed Earl's P.O. Box activity. They're reviewing the entire 1974 incident. I closed my eyes. $47 million had reopened a 50-year-old grave. Not just emotionally. Legally. They don't suspect you, Daniel added quickly. But they're being thorough. Thorough. That word felt heavy. The interview was scheduled at a federal building downtown. Neutral setting. Professional tone. 2 investigators. Polite. Measured. They asked about the argument before the storm. About Earl. About whether Tommy had ever mentioned fleeing intentionally. I answered every question plainly. No drama. No defensiveness. Just truth. One investigator leaned back and asked, Mrs. Hayes, did you ever receive communication from Thomas after his disappearance? No. Not a flicker of doubt. They studied me for a long moment. Then nodded. We believe his disappearance was self-initiated due to financial duress, one said. There's no evidence of foul play on your part. Relief washed through me so suddenly I almost swayed. But then, there is, the other added, evidence that someone else assisted him. Earl. Of course. They continued. We're reopening aspects of the financial network he used during relocation. That meant more digging. More questions. More headlines, maybe. Small-town Georgia gossip would have a field day. When I got home, there was another envelope at my door. No posti. Hand-delivered. Inside? A single photograph. Black and white. Tommy standing beside a timber truck in Oregon. Dated 1976. 2 years after his death. On the back, in handwriting that was not his, were the words. She knew. My heart slammed against my ribs. Someone was trying to rewrite history. Again. I called Paul immediately. He had the photo picked up for fingerprints within the hour. This is intimidation, he said. But from who? I asked. Madeline? Clint? Someone connected to Earl? He didn't answer right away. Because for the first time since Oregon began, there was something we didn't control. Something outside the courtroom. Outside probate. Outside Clint's bruised ego. Someone wanted to plant doubt. Public doubt. Legal doubt. Maybe even criminal doubt. And if that narrative took hold, it wouldn't just threaten my inheritance. It would threaten my freedom. That night, I sat by the window again. Rain sliding down the glass. 50 years of silence. Now noise everywhere. But here's the difference between 73 and 24. At 24, I would have collapsed under the weight. At 73, I leaned into it. Because whoever sent that photo, they made one mistake. They underestimated how hard it is to scare a woman who's already survived being thrown away. And I was about to find out exactly who thought they could rewrite my story. That photograph sat on Paul's desk under a clear evidence sleeve like it was something radioactive. Tommy. 1976, alive. Smiling beside a timber truck somewhere in Oregon. And on the back, in blocky black ink. She knew. Those 2 words weren't meant to accuse quietly. They were meant to stain. The question was, who wanted me stained? Fingerprint results came back first. One partial match. Not Clint. Not Madeline. Earl's sister? No. The print matched a former employee of the private investigation firm Madeline had hired during probate. Derek's firm. I sat in Paul's office when he told me. So she's still at it. I asked quietly. Not necessarily, Paul said. This could be independent. Independent intimidation? That didn't make me feel better. But it clarified something. Madeline wasn't done emotionally. even if she was legally cornered. Because here's what happened after the forgery fallout. The district attorney formally charged her with fraud upon the court. Her legal fees drained her savings. Derek disappeared from her life within weeks. And suddenly, the woman who thought she controlled the board had no pieces left. Desperation does not retire gracefully. It lashes out. Meanwhile, federal investigators dug deeper into 1974. They traced Earl's shell business to two men connected to a timberland deal gone wrong in the early 70s. Men who were known for pressuring investors. Tommy had borrowed money he couldn't repay. That part matched his letter. But here's what I didn't know until the investigators laid it out. The men weren't just impatient. They were under investigation for organized fraud operations in multiple states. Tommy panicked. He thought disappearing would erase the debt. It didn't. It just transferred risk. Earl helped him relocate under a modified name. But Earl wasn't loyal. He skimmed money during the early timber investments. When Tommy figured it out, they split. Hard. That's why the P.O. box closed after 3 years. That's why Earl vanished from Georgia. That's why Tommy never came back. Not because of me. Because of money, fear, and pride. When investigators finished reviewing my involvement, they put it in writing. No evidence suggests Loretta Hayes had knowledge of or participation in Thomas Avery's self-initiated disappearance. I framed that letter. Not for public display. For myself. Because once doubt gets thrown at you, even falsely, it can linger in quiet corners of your mind. That letter sealed those corners shut. But the photo still mattered. Because someone had taken the time to deliver it personally. And the timing? Right after Clint confronted me. Right after he threw that blood on your hands line. Coincidence? I didn't believe in coincidence anymore. 2 days later, Paul called again. We subpoenaed Derek's communications during the probate dispute. And he had contact with Clint. My stomach dropped. When? 3 weeks before Clint filed his nuisance claim. So Clint hadn't magically uncovered Earl's story. He'd been fed information. Strategically, Madeline couldn't win in court anymore. So she shifted to destabilizing me socially, legally, emotionally. And Clint, he was the perfect tool. Angry, jealous, financially drowning. When Paul showed me the message exchange transcripts, it was ugly. Derek telling Clint, if she looks guilty, she settles. Clint replying, she ain't as soft as she used to be. Derek, everybody has pressure points. They thought my past was a pressure point. They thought my age was a weakness. They thought reopening 1974 would scare me into cutting a check. They were wrong. The restraining order against Clint was granted without much fuss. Cross-state harassment carries weight. He didn't show up again. Didn't call. Didn't text. He vanished back into Georgia like a storm that finally ran out of thunder. Madeline, meanwhile, faced her sentencing hearing. Suspended sentence. Heavy fine. Mandatory restitution for legal costs tied to the forgery. Her inheritance dreams officially buried. When I heard the outcome, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just felt finished. Finished with fighting ghosts. Finished with defending myself against narratives written by other people. Finished shrinking. One evening at the cafe, Carol looked at me over her coffee and said, "You realize something, don't you?" "What?" "You've spent most of your life reacting to men's decisions. Tommy disappearing. Clint discarding. Madeline reacting to her father. All orbiting choices I didn't make. And now?" I asked. "Now," she said gently, "you get to decide something that has nothing to do with survival." That hit me. Because survival had been the theme for decades. Survive grief. Survive marriage. Survive divorce. Survive litigation. What does a woman do when she's no longer surviving? The answer came quietly. Not dramatic. Not flashy. I started a scholarship fund in Savannah. Small at first. For women over 50 returning to school after divorce or widowhood. Women who'd been told they were too old. Too dull. Too late. I named it the Wildflower Grant. After that pressed yellow flower in my tin box. Because wildflowers don't ask permission to grow. They just do. When word reached Georgia about the scholarship, something interesting happened. Clint's name started surfacing in whispers. People remembering how quickly he'd moved Brandy in. How loud he'd been about my boring ways. How suddenly quiet he got when the inheritance hit. Small towns are funny like that. Reputations age differently than people do. I never commented publicly. Didn't need to. Dignity does more work than revenge ever could. One crisp spring morning, Daniel came by with the final estate closure documents. All assets transferred, he said. All disputes resolved. $47 million. Fully mine. I signed the last page and felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not even relief. Peace. Real peace. The kind that isn't loud. That evening, I opened Tommy's sealed letter one more time. Read the last line again. You deserved a braver man. He was right. But here's the truth I finally understood. I didn't need a braver man. I became the brave one. And that changed everything. I thought that was the final chapter. The inheritance settled. The investigations closed. Clint gone. Madeline sentenced. But life doesn't stop when the courtroom doors close. Because 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from Savannah. And the voice on the other end said something I never expected to hear. Loretta, there's someone here asking about you. Says he knew Thomas in Oregon. And what he claimed shook the entire story one last time. When you're 73 years old, you think you've heard every possible variation of a surprise. You haven't. Trust me. The call came from Savannah, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years, Mrs. Delaney. The same woman who used to bring over pound cake after Sunday service and knew everybody's business before the ink dried on it. Her voice was tight. Loretta, there's a man here. He says he knew Thomas out in Oregon. Says he's been looking for you. I felt my chest tighten. What's his name? He says it's Michael Rourke. Never heard it before. What does he want? He says he has something that belongs to you. I sat down slowly, because that phrase, something that belongs to you, had already cost me sleep, reputation, and half my emotional bandwidth this year. Did he say what it was? I asked. Mrs. Delaney hesitated. He says it's a recording. A recording? Of what? My hands went cold. I didn't jump on a plane right away. I'm not reckless. I called Paul first. We ran the name. Michael Rourke. 68 years old. Former timber foreman in Oregon during the late 70s. No criminal record. No direct connection to Earl. But, and here's the part that made my pulse spike. He worked for a logging operation tied to the same land parcels Tommy invested in after he disappeared. This wasn't random. It was proximity. Calculated proximity. Paul advised caution. Meet in a public place. Do not go alone. And do not agree to anything on the spot. I booked a flight anyway. Because some ghosts don't stay buried just because lawyers say they should. Savannah hit different this time. The air heavier. The Spanish moss thicker. Memories louder. I met Michael at a small diner off Abercorn Street. Neutral territory. Public. Bright lighting. He was already seated when I walked in. Gray beard. Weathered face. Eyes that looked like they'd seen storms. He stood when I approached. Mrs. Hayes, he asked softly. Yes. He nodded once. Respectful. Not dramatic. That eased something in me. We sat. He didn't waste time. I worked with Thomas Avery in Oregon, he said plainly. Not Thomas Hayes. Thomas Avery. My maiden name. He used it deliberately. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. My throat went dry. When? I managed. 1981. That stopped me. 1981? I repeated. He was alive then. 7 years after his death. 7 years after I'd rebuilt my life. 7 years of silence. Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. My grandson transferred it from an old cassette, he explained. Thomas recorded it for you. I didn't touch it yet. What's on it? I asked. He talks, Michael said simply. About regret. Regret. That word landed heavy. Why didn't you deliver this sooner? I asked. His jaw tightened. He asked me not to. Said you deserve peace. Said if he ever resurfaced legally, then I should come forward. Legally. So he knew he'd left a legal mess behind. He never resurfaced, I said. No, Michael agreed quietly. He didn't. I didn't listen to the recording in the diner. I couldn't. I took it back to my hotel room. Sat on the edge of the bed like I was 24 again. Heart pounding. I pressed play. Static crackled. Then his voice. Older. Rougher. But unmistakably Tommy. Loretta, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't fix what I broke. I covered my mouth. Tears came before I could stop them. I thought I was protecting you, he continued. The men I owed weren't bluffing. Earl made it sound simple. New name. Cash work. Start over. I believed him. Pause. I didn't realize I was making you carry the weight instead. My chest ached. I heard you moved on. That you remarried. I told myself that meant I did the right thing. Another pause. But the truth is, I was scared. Not of you. Of failing you. That hit harder than any accusation Clint ever threw at me. I wanted to come back, he said. More than once. But every year that passed made it harder. Shame grows roots. He coughed lightly. If you ever find out I lived, I hope you hate me less than I deserve. The tape clicked. And I sat there in silence for a long time. Not because it reopened love, but because it closed doubt. He didn't leave because of me. He left because he was afraid of being small in front of me. And men do strange things when pride and fear mix. The next morning, I met Michael again. Why now? I asked him. He didn't dodge it. Thomas died in 1992, he said. That air left my lungs. Heart failure. He worked himself hard. Harder than he should have. So why wait this long? I pressed. He looked almost ashamed. Because when your inheritance hit the news, I realized you'd know he was alive eventually. And I figured you deserved to hear it from him. Not a courtroom. That made sense. Painfully. Back in Portland, I gave Paul a copy of the recording. Legally, it didn't change anything. The estate was settled. The investigations closed. But emotionally, it shifted something fundamental. For 50 years, I carried the narrative that I had been left. Now I understood. I had been feared. Not abandoned. Not blamed. Feared. Because I was stronger than he was. And he couldn't live in that shadow. I didn't publicize the recording. Didn't share it with Georgia gossip. Didn't weaponize it against Clint. Some truths are sacred, even if they arrive decades late. One evening, sitting by my window watching the rain, I realized something profound. Every man in this story, Tommy, Clint, even Derek, tried to manage me through control, through silence, through manipulation, through fear. And every single time, they underestimated my resilience. Tommy thought I couldn't handle the truth. Clint thought I couldn't handle money. Madeline thought I couldn't handle pressure. They were wrong. All of them. But here's the twist I didn't expect. 2 weeks after I returned from Savannah, Paul called again. His voice was measured. Careful. There's been an inquiry, he said. From who? A financial crimes division. My stomach tightened. About what? About transactions Thomas made in the late 80s. Large transfers. Offshore. I went very still. What does that have to do with me? I asked. We don't know yet, Paul said. But your name appears once. Once. That's all it takes. After everything. After closure. After peace. After finally hearing his voice. Now this. I looked out the window at the Oregon rain and felt the calm before another storm. Because if Thomas had moved money offshore, and my name appeared anywhere near it, then this story wasn't done. Not even close. Just when you think a story has finally settled into its ending, life reaches into the past and flips over one more stone. Paul's call about the financial crimes division sat heavy in my chest for days. Not panic. Not exactly. But that uneasy feeling you get when someone says your name in a room you weren't supposed to be in. Your name appears once, he had said. Once is enough to start a mess. And I had already cleaned up one lifetime's worth. We met at his office in downtown Portland 2 days later. Paul had a thick file open on the desk. Let's start simple, he said. Do you recognize this account number? He slid a document across the table. I leaned forward. Numbers. bank stamps, transfer logs. And there it was. Account holder, L. Caldwell. My maiden name. My stomach dropped. I never opened this account, I said immediately. I know, Paul replied calmly. But it existed. The bank? An institution in the Cayman Islands. I stared at him. You're telling me Tommy opened an offshore account in my name? That appears to be the case. My head started spinning. How much? Paul flipped the page. Over time, roughly $2.3 million passed through it. $2.3 million. In the 1980s. That was real money back then. That account closed in 1991, he continued. 1 year before Thomas died. And where did the money go? Paul leaned back slightly. That's the interesting part. The funds were transferred back into the United States through a timber holding company Tommy owned near Willamette Valley. Legal. Clean. Documented. But the trail was murky before that. He moved money through multiple shell companies, Paul explained. Not unusual for someone hiding from creditors. But here's the part that mattered. Your name appears as the original beneficiary of the offshore account. Beneficiary. Not just account holder. So what does the Financial Crimes Division want? I asked. They want to confirm whether you had knowledge of the account. I laughed quietly. If I had $2 million offshore in 1985, I probably wouldn't have been working the front desk at the school library in Georgia. Paul smiled faintly. Exactly. Still, they needed a formal statement. Because when large sums cross borders in old financial systems, somebody eventually asks questions. Even if it's 30 years later. The interview took place at a federal office building overlooking the river. 2 investigators. Again. Different department this time. They were polite, professional, and thorough. Mrs. Hayes, one said, did you ever authorize Thomas Avery to open financial accounts under your maiden name? No. Did you ever receive funds from such accounts? No. Were you aware he was using your identity for financial transactions? No. They watched my face carefully. I met their eyes the entire time. Because truth is easy to remember. Lies require rehearsal. After an hour, the lead investigator closed his folder. Based on available documentation and your testimony, he said, we have no indication you were involved. Relief washed through me again. But then he added something unexpected. Frankly, Mrs. Hayes, it looks like Thomas was trying to protect that money for you. Protect it? I frowned. How? Your name-insured creditors couldn't easily trace it to him. So Tommy had used my identity as a shield. Not to steal from me. To hide something from me. Even if I never knew it existed. That was classic Tommy. Messy. Complicated. Half noble. Half foolish. When the interview ended, Paul and I walked along the river for a while. Cold wind. Gray sky. You're officially clear, he said. But the money itself was already absorbed into the estate decades ago. Meaning the $47 million inheritance already included it. Tommy had eventually moved the offshore funds into legitimate investments. Investments that grew. And grew. Until the fortune landed on my doorstep 50 years later. I shook my head slowly. All that chaos. And he was still trying to take care of me. In his own misguided way, Paul said. That night, I listened to the recording Michael gave me again. Tommy's voice sounded tired. Older. Full of regrets. But one line stood out now more than ever. I thought disappearing would protect you. He never stopped trying to fix that mistake. Even if he did it badly. Even if it took decades. Back in Savannah, word about Clint had taken another turn. Apparently Brandy left him. Moved to Florida with someone else. The house he fought so hard to keep? He had to refinance it. Rumor was the payments weren't easy. When Carol told me that over the phone, she asked carefully, how do you feel about that? I thought about it. Honestly, no different, I said. And it was true. Because revenge isn't as satisfying as people think. Peace is better. Peace lets you sleep. The Wildflower Grant Scholarship started gaining attention. Women wrote letters. Stories poured in. Widows going back to nursing school. Divorced grandmothers learning bookkeeping. A 58-year-old woman starting a degree in engineering. Every letter reminded me of something simple. Money didn't make my life meaningful, but it gave me the chance to help someone else rewrite theirs. One afternoon, while reviewing scholarship applications, Carol looked up from a letter and said something that stuck with me. You know what's funny? What? All the men who underestimated you ended up shaping the woman who built this. She was right. Tommy's disappearance forced resilience. Clint's betrayal forced independence. Madeline's attack forced strength. None of them meant to help me grow. But they did. I thought that realization might finally close the story. Past settled. Fortune stabilized. Reputation intact. But life had one last twist waiting. Because a week later, I received a letter. Handwritten. Postmarked Georgia. The handwriting was shaky. Unfamiliar. Inside was a single sentence. I owe you an apology before I die. Signed. Clint Hayes. And what he revealed in that final letter changed the way I saw the last 40 years of my life. I stared at Clint's letter for a long time before opening it. Not because I was afraid, but because I genuinely didn't know if I cared anymore. There was a time when that man's opinion could ruin my whole week. Now, it barely moved the needle. Still, curiosity is a stubborn thing. So I sat down at my kitchen table in Portland, poured myself a cup of coffee, and unfolded the paper. His handwriting looked rough, uneven, like his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. The letter was short, but every word carried weight. Loretta, I'm not writing this to get anything from you. I already know I burned that bridge clean to the ground. Doctor says my heart isn't doing too good these days. Funny thing about getting older. It forces you to sit with the things you spent years avoiding. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the night I threw you out. About the things I said. About the kind of man that made me. Truth is, I knew about Tommy before you ever inherited that money. I stopped reading. My chest tightened. Knew. How? I picked the letter back up. About 15 years ago, a man came through town asking about you. Said he worked in Oregon timber. Said he knew Thomas Avery. I didn't believe him at first. Then he showed me a photograph. Tommy standing next to a logging truck. Alive. I didn't tell you. Not then. Not ever. You want the ugly truth? I was afraid. Not that you'd be hurt. I was afraid you'd leave me. If you knew your first husband had been alive all those years, maybe you'd start asking questions about your life. About us. And I didn't want those questions. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't the man you deserved. So I buried it. Selfish, plain and simple. I leaned back in my chair. 15 years. He knew for 15 years. The letter continued. When the inheritance story hit the news, I panicked. I figured if Tommy left you all that money, then he must have still loved you. And if that was true, then maybe you never really loved me the same way. So I did what small men do. I lashed out. Tried to make you look guilty. Tried to take a piece of something that wasn't mine. I'm ashamed of that. More ashamed than you'll probably ever know. My throat tightened. Not with anger. Just clarity. The final part of the letter was only a few lines. I know an apology doesn't erase 41 years of mistakes. But I needed to say it anyway. You were never dull, Loretta. You were the strongest person I ever knew. And I spent most of our marriage pretending I wasn't intimidated by that. I hope whatever life you've built now, it's peaceful. You earned that peace. Clint. I folded the letter slowly, set it on the table, and sat there for a while. Not crying. Not shaking. Just thinking. Because that letter answered something I didn't even realize had been sitting in the back of my mind all these years. Clint didn't throw me away because I was dull. He threw me away because I reminded him of what he wasn't. And that kind of mirror can make weak people uncomfortable. The next morning, I took a walk along the river. Cold air. Gray Oregon sky. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. For the first time since this whole wild story started, I felt something settle. Not victory. Not revenge. Closure. Real closure. Tommy ran because he was afraid of failing me. Clint pushed me away because he was afraid of not measuring up. Two different men. Same fear. And neither of them ever realized something simple. I never needed them to be perfect. I just needed them to be honest. A few weeks later, I wrote Clint back. Not a long letter. Just a few lines. I told him I received his apology. I told him I hoped he found some peace too. And I told him something I truly meant. I forgive you. Not for his sake. For mine. Because forgiveness isn't about pretending someone didn't hurt you. It's about refusing to carry that weight any longer. At 73 years old, my shoulders were done carrying other people's baggage. Life settled into something simple after that. The wildflower grant kept growing. More women every year. Stories that made me proud. Stories that reminded me how strong people can be when the world tells them they're finished. Sometimes I'd read those letters and smile. Because every once in a while, a woman would write something like, "They told me I was too old to start over." And I'd think, "Honey, I started over at 73. You're right on time." The tin box still sits on my dresser. Marriage certificate. Old letters. The pressed wildflower. And now one more thing. Tommy's recording. I don't listen to it often. But sometimes on quiet evenings, I play the first few seconds. Just long enough to remember something important. Life isn't about the mistakes people make. It's about what you build afterward. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that being underestimated might be the greatest gift a woman can receive. Because when people think you're finished, they stop watching. And that's when you quietly build the most beautiful second act of your life.